The most memeable hurricane in who knows how long is out of here. Now, where were we?
The wacky world of MultimediaJay.
All of my project systems answer the same general question of what you can do with hardware that isn't the latest and greatest. But these three in particular are going to answer a very important question here in 2021. What mileage can you get out of old hardware despite all the part shortages that are out there right now? Each one of these systems I want to change up the hardware to answer that question. So first we have Tuxedo. Tuxedo has a pre-Ryzen AMD processor in it that isn't really worth using versus an Intel Sandy Bridge. But if you happen to have one of those, what can you do with it? I want to put my GTX 760 in there. That way, the processor technology being from the early 2010s can be paired up with a graphics card from the early 2010s. The Dellasaurus, running off of a Sandy Bridge, represents one of the cheapest things you can get these days in terms of getting into PC gaming on the cheap, but it's going to have a stock power supply. So the question is, with the limited graphics cards that don't cost an arm and a leg, like the 1050 Ti, which will still be way too expensive, what can you get with Sandy Bridge plus 1050 Ti? And lastly, I'm not giving up on Dellasaurus Rex. I want to answer all of my remaining questions about the project and figure out how to jam a normal size graphics card inside this thing, no matter how many special cables I have to buy just to keep the motherboard working. We already swapped out the serial ATA cables, but I would not leave it off the table to be turning USB headers 90 degrees or something in order to get everything to fit. So let's answer all three questions, beginning with, let's set up Tuxedo for hardware that's period appropriate for the early 2010s. This thing has certainly seen better days. This case is actually circa 2007. I originally had the Core 2 Duo system in it, and it is so old that this thing is actually old enough to have developed some rust. So yeah, it's getting up there in years, but it was a steel case instead of an aluminum case. However, I can see through the little grate here, grate, that's the word I'm looking for. I see my 1060 in there. That is way too nice for a system this old. Let's swap that for a 760. Midnaughts, lacking a proper power supply right now, is basically turning into the computer version of polishing a turd. A 760 with a Core 2 quad? Nah. And what's really way too nice for this system is this cooler. Oh man, look at this heatsink. Way too shiny given the piece of crap that runs this system. But hey, I wanted to switch to third-party cooling, and if I remember right, this board was actually too old for... Oh no, I couldn't find a Hyper 212 Evo that was decently priced for a piece of junk like this. Or something like that. Let's get the 760 out of here. We can put something older in this old thing. So here's the idea. We have an FX8320E chip in here, the most power-efficient FX series chip that was ever released, which isn't saying much because the Sandy Bridge still blows it away. Let's get rid of this, what's that, 1060? Yeah, that's my 1060 for when I built Monolith. Put in the 760 instead, and we'll have stuff from the early 2010s. So if you bought someone's, what they thought was obsolete, early 2010s gaming PC, then what would you have to play with there? I'm totally tempted to just blank Windows and just reinstall everything from scratch. But one step at a time here. That should be good enough to cold start this pig. I still can't believe I'm using a Noctua fan in this thing. Talk about polishing a turd. I just hope you folks aren't too offended by the whole reference to polishing turds like this. But hey, the truth is what it is. We're talking, oh man, this motherboard that I bought was practically spoiling this processor to even do this in the first place. This system should not even still exist. And with any luck, maybe the power supply will just go boom, and it won't exist anymore. It'll be one less headache I have to deal with. Just gotta figure out what to do about scrap metal for this case with all the rust. Whatever. Okay. How long has it been since I started this thing up? Probably too long, as we shall find out. There should have been a post beep by now. Nah, let's see how much reseating RAM and other stuff. Oh no! Good. Just took a little bit longer to start up than usual. Alright, start the endless barrage of Windows updates, which is undoubtedly... I'd prefer not to think of it. Oh, cool. It was in the middle of a Windows update when I shut it off, and I just changed out some of the hardware. Well, that's an awful long Windows update, considering I think it was months ago the last time I had this thing hooked up. And it's sucking about 150 watts, well, sometimes 150 watts, but way more power than any of my systems nowadays would do when they were just doing CPU stuff like installing Windows updates. And this was the most power-efficient FX chip that AMD could come up with. Whatever. Well, it took a long time, but Tuxedo's finally ready for prime time. So this system basically represents the early 2010s and whatever it can still do today. We have a Vishera-era processor and a Kepler-era graphics card. But at least it can drop down to 50 watts when it's not doing anything important, which is actually still kind of crappy compared to what the Intels of the era could do. Hey, what can I say? It was the AMD FX era. So in terms of if you bought somebody's junk gaming PC that they thought was useless, how non-useless could you make it? That's the big question we have to answer with Tuxedo. The Delosauruses, however, have something completely different going on. Now, when I first got the Sandy Bridge Dellasaurus, there were some people that were like, hey, why are you using the stock power supply? Put a custom power supply in that thing and soup that up. And I was like, nah, I want to see how far a retail conversion can go. And then I was like, hey, I'll just get an Ivy Bridge machine and I'll answer the question that way. So I did. The problem is that Ivy Bridge was actually a talk iteration, so to speak, so it wasn't so much an increase in speed as it was a refinement of what was already there through newer manufacturing. So it was more of a jump in power efficiency than it was in speed. The difference between the i7 Sandy Bridge and the i7 Ivy Bridge is a grand total of about 3% effective performance. What changed radically was the power efficiency going to the new manufacturing process. However, I've noticed with these Optiplex motherboards, they have their shares of gotchas, like a maximum card length in order to install a custom graphics card. However, I've noticed though, despite upgrading Dellasaurus Rex to these very, very flat cables to be able to squeeze a full-size graphics card in here, that there's this USB header over at the front of the motherboard that gets in the way of putting the graphics card in. You basically have to give up the USB 3 ports on the front of the system in order to do this. However, if we go back to the Sandy Bridge Dellasaurus, there is nothing like that in the front. You just have to make sure that you're not crashing into the RAM with your graphics card. So, I wonder, let's get the 1060 in here. Yeah, thought so. I knew there was something about this Sandy Bridge. So we're going to reverse the roles of these two computers. The Sandy Bridge Dellasaurus is going to be the one that we upgrade the power supply and get the 1060 working in. The Ivy Bridge Dellasaurus is going to be the system that we gear up for efficiency with a retail conversion only with the no extra power graphics card. And we'll see what we get in terms of results. I've been saying for a while that if it wasn't for the 1090Ti, I would have actually used a Sandy Bridge for a long time. Well, this is a Sandy Bridge 2600 Core i7. Let's see how right I would have been. Alright, I guess we got some hardware swapping to do. There we go. Now this is probably the Dellasaurus you folks have been hoping for. Sandy Bridge i7 with an upgraded power supply, 1060. It can fit a regular size graphics card without losing USB ports because there's no USB header underneath the graphics card. I dare say that the Optiplex 990 is better than the 9020, except with power efficiency, of course, with the older processor manufacturing and everything. I hope it still works anyways, because I accidentally dropped the graphics card while shuffling everything around. Never seen these things bounce before. Now watch it not work and I look like an idiot, and now this is very, very pricey if we lose this. I did, however, also bring over the little flap thing as well, since I had to buzz the edge off in order to get the graphics card in here. I don't want to buzz two of them now. So, yeah, took the best of everything, the RAM, the graphics card, everything, over to the Sandy Bridge Dellasaurus. This will be the system that goes for power, and then Dellasaurus Rex will be the system that goes for efficiency. Okay, Dellasaurus time. The Dellasaurus that people have been hoping I'd have one of these days. It's finally here. It's going to require a brand new Windows 10 installation, but first, let's see if we get a video signal after that little drop. Alright, that's on. We have video! Sweet! Alright, let's set up Windows. See you in a couple hours. Oh yeah, we're totally getting retro here. I think this computer's just a little bit too old for bootable USB, at least without messing around in the BIOS. And here's Dellasaurus Rex, back down to bone stock power supply and, well, the stuff that the other Dellasaurus used to have. And of course, 1050 Ti. This will represent basically what you can get with, say, an Ivy Bridge refurb and a 1050 Ti in today's climate. And I did all of this while Windows 10 was installing on the Dellasaurus. I knew it. I knew there'd be this kind of sleepy installation speed. We are going back to optical disc for this, so whatever. And just like that, it's the next day. Told you these things would take a while. Took a long time, even over gigabit network, to transfer the games over, get them to the point where I could fire them up on here and we can compare the settings and everything. But I decided to go with ESO as the comparison game because ESO has been updated quite a bit lately. ESO nowadays has some very fancy graphics stuff in it. So running this game at maximum, I cannot get anywhere close to 60 on a regular basis with this. Which shouldn't surprise me because the Sandy Bridge processor, despite being an i7, is about as far behind in terms of effective performance as if I were to upgrade to the latest Intel processors from where I am with Skylake nowadays. So, yeah, I'm actually seeing 30 FPS when I try running ESO at maximum. Some of that is because of the CPU, and some of that is because of the GPU. Let me guess, I have to cut it down to high mode in order to get some more solid 60s. Yeah, thought so. The baseline setting has to be high instead of maximum. So, but I can turn up the temporal anti-aliasing as well as the ambient occlusion all the way, and still do quite well in terms of performance here. So we're running around Leowen, which is the main city in the new expansion. Let's get the mount in on the action with this paladin guy. Let's go over to the crafting area where there's lots of people. See how much things crash down. Just like in Daggerfall. Yeah, so we're getting like 40s, 50s, and 60s. So we do have to back the settings off, but I think some of that is due to the graphics card, at least as much as it's due to the processor. But hey, this is a pretty solid experience, being able to crank settings relatively high with this and still get 60 frames per second. And this is ESO, which has had its graphics engines upgraded more recently, so I imagine if I had this on the big screen, I wouldn't lose too much in terms of eye candy. But playing this game on a secondary system like this is only worth it after I've played through the initial experience on Monolith, because I am losing some horsepower in order to do this. Still, though, it'd be interesting to hook this Dellasaurus up to the capture box, so there's no overhead or anything for streaming, and then stream off of this thing, just to show what a Sandy Bridge and a 1060 can do. Power-wise, the Dellasaurus now chugs along at about 40-something watts, and it'll crank up to about 200 when running full blast. I think Tuxedo actually goes higher because of the older stuff that's in it. Not a bad setup, if I do say so myself. The processor is running a little hot though. I think it's about time I replace the thermal material. This is probably the original thermal material from 2012, so I'll bet it's like concrete by now. It's interesting though how one little difference, one little detail on the motherboard makes all the difference when it comes to the viability of a Dellasaurus project. So not having a plug to get in the way of the edge of the graphics card there is one of the best things you can basically have in order to fit a regular sized graphics card inside one of these old Optiplexes. You will still, however, have to get those low profile Silverstone cables in order to get everything to fit. But I'm kind of surprised this is the little computer that could. And it's a great example of why I'm so grumpy about Windows 11 and its security requirements, because this has enough horsepower to play modern ESO at relatively high settings still. And I'm actually curious if we polish this turd even further by upgrading this graphics card. Could we max everything out? I just don't feel like pulling the 2060 out of Monolith to check that out just yet. But that's the thing. I mean, these old systems, especially with hyper-threading enabled, can still play today's games. And so to lock all of that out because of TPM support, somebody who would make a gaming PC out of something like this is basically, they want to just play some games on it. They probably wouldn't want to use this as their main system. But that's another discussion for another day. Let's get Dellasaurus Rex working again with the 1050 Ti. Crack all your jokes about how the mighty have fallen if you want. I think a lot of it depends on how much of this RAM flakes out the minute we apply power. However, if I were able to, in this wonderful day and age of GPUs being way too expensive, crowdfund a GPU that was this length with more powerful hardware in it, I would actually foot the bill for a power supply to upgrade this to an EVGA 600 bronze like the other one. And then we could see if... and then we could actually compare these two systems directly. But the bottom line is, with this specific Ivy Bridge model, that front USB that's lurking in there, light that sucker up, that front USB right there is the biggest issue with these with the graphics cards and whatnot. Yeah, you can bring in your Silverstone cables like what we did earlier, but then you got to figure out what to do with that thing. Little tiny detail on the motherboard makes all the difference in terms of how well your Dellasaurus project is going to do. Alright, let's see how much of this still works. Dellasaurus Rex turned out to be the system that focused on efficiency over power. Whatever. Well then, retail conversion it is. I see the old power supply, bone stock power supply, still works, and we still get a post screen. Now, let's see how much RAM it detects and all that other crap, because we swapped out the RAM, blah, 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 blah. Oh, wait, I see a Dell screen again. Oh, wait, it's logging in. Okay, maybe there's hope for this thing after all. That's cool. Logged right in like I was just using it yesterday. Dellasaurus Rex, Ivy Bridge, and a 1050 Ti. This is about what you could get if you were buying stuff that didn't cost too much of an arm and a leg. But here we go again. I'm in the same position that I was with the regular Dellasaurus, is I can turn on some eye candy, but I have to start with a lower baseline if the graphics card isn't up to snuff. So whereas last time we started with Ultra, or High Mode instead of Ultra, this time we're starting with Medium. So you can start with the medium settings and then turn up HBAO or Screen Space GI and then turn on the temporal anti-aliasing and have it look nice for a medium game. But fundamentally, this game is still very much playable, and I can actually turn some settings down if I really wanted to and just play this, you know, as is. Get close to 60 frames per second at 1080p. Not getting a perfect 60, but if I head over to the southwest, we'll see things dip down a little more. I'm not getting perfect 60s on Monolith either. I'm just sacrificing a couple of frames per second that I usually don't notice for some extra eye candy. But yeah, this is Dellasaurus Rex. You have to turn down the settings lower because of the graphics card, as opposed to the other Dellasaurus. But what I find most interesting is that while all of this is going on, we're barely clearing the 100 watt mark. 120 watts or so. Now imagine a future where you can get game performance like this while using far less energy. To some extent, I think that mobile gaming might go in this direction sometime in the next few years, at least for those super expensive phones. I've been wondering for years when the gaming phone was going to come out that can broadcast to a TV, and then you hook up a Bluetooth controller or keyboard mouse, and you PC game, quote unquote, that way using your phone. It really is something to consider. Send on out to the cathedral over here. Still hanging around 60 FPS unless there's a lot of things going on the screen, but this is an Ivy Bridge paired with a 1050 Ti, and I'm able to get close to max on all of this. Not bad if I do say so myself. Now the last thing I want to do is I want to do this with Tuxedo, and I'm betting with Tuxedo I'm going to have similar results to Dellasaurus Rex, but suck a lot more power in order to get those results. Those of you people that think I'm too obsessed with electricity usage when it comes to PCs and stuff like that, this is the reason why I focus on it. Because if you're going to get the same experience, why would you want things to run hotter or your power bill to take a little bit of a hit or something like that? And then, of course, we can talk about when things get power efficient enough. Imagine a world you could play games like this and charge a device with a cell phone charger. 5 volts. So, and then charge those off of solar panels. Yeah, off-grid gaming. That's something that, at some point, we should really look towards. Because we're going to hit physical walls with 4K gaming and stuff like that. Yeah, definitely some things to think about. Let's hook Tuxedo back up and finish off all of this.
Spartans! Tonight we check out Windows 10! Delosaurus, 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 Delosaurus,
Ah, the lovely world of TikTok. Whatever. Yeah, thought so. It's worse. Much worse. Oh man, I'm actually better off with Dellasaurus Rex than I am with this system. Because this is just an embarrassment. And it really shows just how terribly the AMD FX platform as well as early 2010s hardware has aged. You can get 1080-60, but you have to start with a baseline game graphics setting of medium, and unlike with Dellasaurus Rex, you have to turn more stuff down. And some of this is because we're dealing with a Kepler graphics card here, so we're going back quite a ways in the hierarchy of graphics cards. So the newer stuff that does better with some of this fancy new eye candy that's out these days, that's more of a thing. Well, that's more in play here because we're going back a little ways on the graphics capability, or even the graphics features that are available. Never mind their capabilities. I'm still seeing screen tearing even though VSync's turned on. Oh yeah, that's right. This card actually doesn't even support fast mode. It only supports adaptive if I want to have fancy VSync for it. So yeah, you can get similar performance to Dellasaurus Rex. You can get similar performance to Dellasaurus Rex, but you have to turn down more features. And here's the icing on top of the cake. This is lower than it was before. 200 plus watts. When this thing is running full blast, it flirts with the 300 watt mark. So, that's Tuxedo, AMD FX, 8320, etc. But it just goes to show that AMD has had problems for years with their products, sometimes being good performance-wise, but never being as refined. I'm actually curious if history is about to repeat itself with the Intel Golden Core processors that are coming out, with a mixture of high-performance cores and power efficiency cores based on the Intel Atom, versus what happens with AMD and the Ryzen and whatnot. But both processors are at the end of an era, so to speak, with what's out right now. We're seeing what comes next and who makes the first move. But by and large, the best experience will be on monolith, even though the game looks pretty good at lower settings. It'd be interesting if maybe I hooked these computers up and did some streams comparing ESO to these various and seeing what it took to get good performance out of this. If you don't mind 1080-30, you can still use hardware this old. I got a solid 30 FPS, but knowing I get 1080-60 and some 4K on my newest system makes me really, really not want to mess with 1080-30 ever again. It's just going too far back. At some point, you know, you're better off just using a console. Well, abysmally horrendous performance aside, it at least looks cool in dark mode colors. But yeah, 8320E doesn't hold a candle to the Dellasaurus' Sandy Bridge i7. And the GTX 760 actually comes up short versus the 1050 Ti. So this is one of the reasons why I wanted to run this hardware into the ground in this case specifically, because this big shadow of a case was because it truly is the computer version of what's called in the world of movies and whatnot a period piece. Or games, I guess, can do this too nowadays, where you have a system that basically represents the best that a certain point in time could do, or what a certain point in time could do. And movies and plays, of course, trying to illustrate historical periods and things like that, have tried to do the same thing. Some light on it. How about some more light on it? There we go. Hey, play around with a light wand. Play around with a light wand and make it look nice and dramatic, or reflect off of that nice Newegg logo. Here we go. This looks cool. Ooh. Just goes to show how just by twisting and turning one single light you can fine-tune the lighting in a scene like this. Anyway, Tuxedo looks cool, but it basically represents its time period, the 2010s. The heyday of the 8350 Sabertooth. AMD fans will remember that. But by and large, though, AMD, even if you could get performance out of it, was nowhere near as refined as Intel. It wasn't until the Ryzen era that AMD started making Intel have to go back to the drawing board. We'll see what happens with the next round of processors as well, especially as AMD goes into socket AM5. But there we go. It's not exactly Five Brothers pasta sauce with that old slogan, Five Brothers, One Passion, but 3 computers, 1 curiosity. Tuxedo, the Dellasaurus, and Dellasaurus Rex all answer the same general question about how long hardware could keep playing 1080p 60 games, all in their own unique style. Although I am still kind of surprised that the Dellasaurus has wound up changing roles. Till next time, this is MultimediaJay, signing off. Thanks for stopping by.